it was an honor to meet her and to meet you as well. But we were also talking, before we got started here, about the material that you present, this historical argument that
Yep.
you're pretty well known for. And we were talking about how easy it is for people to understand. And I have, spent the last 12 years of my life, studying and, working on various degrees. And one of the problems that I see is that a lot of well-known apologists, their material is above a lot of people's heads. It's they just can't grasp a lot of it, and I think that's a problem that we need to to think very carefully about. We, at least as pastors and church leaders and even evangelists and apologists, our job is to equip the people to do the work of the service, to go out and to interact with these Muslims. And I just appreciate this historical material that you're going to present for us today. And again, I'm just grateful that it's actually useful for a lot of people. You were sharing about the last time I think you spoke at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills. Was that right?
Yeah.
And you tell us about that and what you told
Let me
me.
just back up and tell you why I'm even doing this, and
Okay.
it has to do back in the 1900s. That seems like a long time ago, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Way back in the when I was when we were, I was in London. I had just come to London in 1992, so we're talking about in the last century. 1992, we had just come there. I was going to Speaker's Corner. I was told that's the best place to learn your apologetics, which is true, as I said earlier. And then in 1994, I was taking a course under a professor called Dr. Gerald Hotting, who was at that time the world authority on what I call the origins argument. It's called the origins. What was the origin of anything? The origins of Christianity, the origins of Buddhism, and of the origins of Islam. This is a whole new area that no one really has touched, at least in depth. And he was introducing he had a course called the origins of Islam. I took it out of curiosity. I thought I knew everything about how Islam began. I didn't think I was going to hear anything new. I had already had a master's degree in Islamic studies from Fuller Seminary under Dr. Dudley Woodbury. And I thought, goodness sakes, what's more can he teach me? All you do is you read the Sirah of Muhammad, the Sirah, which would be the biography of Muhammad. And that's written by Alfred Guillaume, translated by Alfred Guillaume, about from Ibn Ishaq. Ibn Ishaq lays it all out, exactly Muhammad's story and how Islam began with him. Now, of course, Muslims will come back and say, no, Islam has always been. But the Islam that we see today, the Islam of Mecca and Medina, the Islam of the Qur'an, that Islam I'm talking about, that Islam began with Muhammad. And so I thought I knew everything. So I go into class there, right, all in, and there are, maybe 50 students in the class. And this Dr. Hotting, he starts introducing and he starts saying, we don't have any reference to this guy named Muhammad at all in the 7th century. And I say, wait a minute, hold on a minute. Ibn Ishaq. I put my hands up. What about Ibn Ishaq? He was right there. And Hotting says, do you know when he died? Well, no, somewhere in the 7th century. No, he died in 765. That's the mid-8th century. You think he was there 130 years earlier? Did he live for 130 years, are you saying? I mean, he just kind of threw it right back in my lap. He wasn't being foolish. He didn't try to make a fool out of me. I had never heard the dates. Nobody had told me these dates. And see, the Muslims you're going to read or you talk to, none of the Muslims know these dates of these people. Oh, they know the name Ibn Ishaq and Ibn Hisham and Al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim and Ibn Dawud and Tirmidhi. These are all the dates that they grew up with. I'm sorry, the names that they grew up. These are household names. What you don't know is that these guys died at a certain time, like we all die. But nobody ever bothered to look and see when they lived or where they lived. He said, listen, this is 130 years later that you're reading this story. But he says, do you think that story's from him? I said, well, yeah, it is. He said, did you read the introduction by Alfred Guillaume? Alfred Guillaume spells out very quickly that this is not from Ibn Ishaq. It's attributed to Ibn Ishaq, but it's actually written by a guy named Ibn Hisham in 833. He dies in 833. So he's writing maybe the last 20 years of his life. So say 810 to 833. That's 200 years after Muhammad died. Ooh, So the earliest we hear anything, and I'm sitting there listening to this, and I'm scratching my head. And I said, well, then what about the hadith? At least, the hadith. Al-Bukhari, he was there. He says, no, he died in 870. That's the late 9th century. That's 240 years after Muhammad died. He died. And he would have been writing the last 20 years of his life.
Right.
Or at least what is written down would have been written within his lifetime. So let's say 870. And I said, yikes. Well, as he's saying this, and he says Abu Dawud or Ibn Tirmidhi, they come after Al-Bukhari. I said, well, then what about the tafsir, the tarikh, the history? The history, there certainly the history is from people that knew him. History, Al-Tabari you're talking about? Yes, Al-Tabari. Al-Tabari died in 923. That's the 10th century. That's even later. That's 300 years. And I'm sitting there scratching my head, but I'm not the only one listening to this. All the other students around me were listening to this. About half the class were Muslim students, about 20, 25 of them. And they were hearing this. And they had all been told, since they were knee-high to a grasshopper, that these guys, these are household names for them. They've heard of Ibn Ishaq and Ibn Hisham and Al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim and Ibn Dawud, and certainly Al-Tabari and Baidawi and Zamakhshari and Suyuti and all these guys. Every one of them were from the 9th, 10th. Suyuti is from the 16th century. None of them were from the 7th century. Not one knew Muhammad. Now, he didn't have to say it like I've just said it.
Right.
He said, you know what that means? None of these guys knew Muhammad. Actually, I don't recall now whether he said that or I said that, because I kept on raising my hand. I was the oldest person there because these are all young students in their teens and 20s, and I was there in my 40s. And I kept on raising my head. And I said, wait a minute. So you're telling me that none of these guys actually lived at the time of Muhammad? They never knew Muhammad? They never heard Muhammad? They never saw what he did or heard what he said? Like we have with Jesus Christ? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Well, Matthew and John, they were there in the 1st century. They were with Jesus for the last 3 years. They saw what he did. They saw the miracles he did. They heard what he said. They wrote down what he said and did. Mark and Luke got it from those who did hear what Jesus said and did. I said, we don't have anything like that for Islam? He says, there's nothing like that for Islam. He said, I spent 20 years as a scholar trying to find anything wrong with the Bible. And I'm a historian, he said. And what I do is I look and I try to see whether the historical facts fit the evidence on the ground. That's what I do. That's what a historian should do. And for 20 years, I've been doing this against Christianity. After 20 years, I gave up. However, he said, the skills that I use against the Bible are the same skills I would use against the Quran. Because you have like with like. You're in the same part of the world. You're with the same kind of people. And you're using the same languages. I already had the languages down. I knew Arabic. I knew Akkadian. I knew Syriac. I knew Hebrew and Greek. These are the languages that we're all taught to do as scholars of the Middle East. We have to learn these. So I said, I already have the skills. I already have, and also I knew about redacted criticism and source criticism. He says, I knew everything about textual criticism and all these different criticisms against the Bible. I just took those same criticisms and I went over this direction. And he says, for the last 20 years, I've been applying them against the Quran. We couldn't find anything wrong with the Bible that hadn't already been found. It all had been done over and everything had been answered. Now suddenly we're finding all kinds of stuff against the Quran. The very same things we've asked of the Bible, the Quran cannot answer.